Yes. That's the video. So to be absolutely clear, I haven't read The Great Gatsby in 10 years or watched the movie in 5. So if you have your own take or your own addition you want to add to the discourse, please feel free. But no, yeah, isn't Great Gatsby just full of parasocial relationships? Isn't there a valid reading of it being exactly just about that? A parasocial relationship, for those of you who are not familiar, is wherein a person falls in love with a persona or with their elevated idea of a person. More recently and often used on internet personas, because people are able to project incredibly hyper-curated versions of themselves that people tend to rally behind and really enjoy, but also extends to celebrity, like how we are so intimately impacted by the goings-on of Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, if that's still relevant celebrity gossip. I think for a relationship to be parasocial, there has to be an inherent power balance, right? Whether it is based in the subject, the person who people are parasocial around, or whether that power is given by the observers who find something important in them. But I think we can all agree that most people look at Gatsby parasocially, right? The titular character Gatsby is never really seen in a moment of weakness until way later in the book, and is very often seen elevated, right? Surrounded by lavish parties and lights and champagne flutes, driving beautiful cars, throwing around beautiful linens. Everything about him is beautiful. And it is a spectacle that captures Nick Carraway. Nick Carraway, who's kind of a 25-year-old thinker, who has a lot of ideas and is sort of starting out his big city job, but ultimately isn't really pushed or pulled in any great direction. He had ambitions at one point, is absolutely absorbed in the spectacle of Gatsby, a person who is able to make their ambitions a reality, and idolizes him for that. Throughout the book, Nick, at least from his perspective, gains further and further intimacy with Jay Gats. But to what extent is that real? To what extent is that his understanding of the situation? Sure, he plays confidant for Gatsby a couple of times, namely with regards to his initial pining for Daisy, as well as covering for Daisy when something happens towards the end of the book. However, these are roles that Nick somewhat inserted themselves into. These are somewhat appropriate spaces for these two to be intimate. Not to mention Nick being a vehicle for Gatsby to reach Daisy in some way or another, right? At no point in this relationship is there a giving up of power from Gatsby. Gatsby is always interacting with the relationship in such a way that he is benefiting, whether it's intentional or not. I think there are readings of Gatsby that are a lot kinder than this one, and I don't think it's necessarily unkind or even evil to interact in a parasocial relationship. But definitely, I don't think Nick is as intimate as he thinks he is with Gatsby. I think it's really interesting in the Baz Luhrmann version of the narrative, the movie narrative, that Nick starts the movie in a psychiatrist's couch. And I think that's really cool. I think that it speaks to a level of madness, right? It speaks to how parasociality is a psychological relationship, one that can be entirely sort of manufactured in the imagination of a person, that he's still locked in this relationship. He's still having a dialogue with his past self, with Gatsby through his memories, by virtue of this particular telling. I think that's pretty cool. Nick's very biased recollection of the situation is really important for most readings of The Great Gatsby, so I'm glad that they put it in the movie. So Nick is never put in an equal playing field with his peer, even if they've met. Can you have a parasocial relationship with someone you've met? It goes back to power, I think, right? That ultimately, there is not an equal balance of it, and there will very rarely be that for like every relationship. But especially for parasocial relationships, there's this ability to be able to present a persona, whether it's given by the observers towards the subject, or whether the subject is able to make it with money, with charm, with charisma. And ultimately, they never meet that middle spot. They get close. There are points where, in their final moments, Gatsby feels encouraged or able to talk to Nick about vulnerable parts of them, but it's only whatever Gatsby wants to give, right? There's another parasocial relationship in the book where it's actually Daisy Buchanan toward Gatsby. Because of course, these two only met in a night, but Daisy had enough of a recollection of this person as a dashing war hero, and later as a dashing war hero who made their rags to riches story come to life, right? Had enough of a investment in this persona that she was able to go for a big romp, is able to enjoy him, able to live her best life with him for a couple of weeks, only for it to come crashing down when she realizes that the persona is not him. The parasocial relationship with Gatsby breaks when Gatsby grabs Thomas Buchanan and attempts to punch him out. All of a sudden, the image that Gatsby had been cultivating so carefully over the course of all of this time suddenly fails for Daisy. Daisy is no longer able to reconcile her image of him and the actual Gatsby that she slowly withdraws in himself as he continues to try to appeal to her. And of course, I don't think a video on parasociality and the Great Gatsby would be complete without talking about how Gatsby is enamored with the image of Daisy more than anything. We don't get to really learn a lot about Daisy's perspective on the world, but one of the main points, one of the most famous lines is, "I hope my daughter grows to be a great fool." Because ultimately, they lived in a time of incredible social and gendered stratification. Daisy has such a dour relationship with reality. Ultimately, she believes that reality is going to mess her up, is going to throw her off. But Gatsby sees her as light. Gatsby sees her as this ideal of love and light and riches. Everything is building up to her. She's that unattainable thing that's just out of reach. And even as he's holding her, even as he's grabbing onto her, he's constantly scared of losing her. And that tenuous relationship causes Gatsby to idolize her in a way that I'm not sure if she would have wanted herself even. It's ultimately the downfall of Gatsby, his parasocial relationship with Daisy. Because nobody in this book really know each other. If you think about it, The Great Gatsby is a big story about people who have really grand ideas specifically about the person next to them. And I think that's neat. Ding, 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 10 minutes.